Isn't it curious that the new frontier is not high doses and magnificent transformations and reconciliations with deceased relatives and giant anacondas eating you, but this very quiet microdosing, which somehow just makes your system work better?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Psychedelic Conversations podcast. And then my guest today is Dr. James Fadiman. He is the founding father of microdosing movement, but I know that he often says, no, I'm not. So I'm just so excited to have you here with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I'm really happy to be here. And just to be contrary, I won't deny that I'm one of the early pioneers of contemporary microdosing. How about that?
Incredible. Thank you so much. Such an honor to have you and be able to talk to you directly about this, incredibly popular. I would say the frontier is like almost the new frontier in the psychedelic use. So it's very powerful.
Isn't it curious that the new frontier is not high doses and magnificent transformations and reconciliations with deceased relatives and giant anacondas eating you, but this very quiet microdosing, which somehow just makes your system work better.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Just before we dive in, I just wanted to give a little bit of background from you and your work, if that's okay.
Sure.
So Dr. James Fadiman, PhD, has been researching psychedelics since 1961. That's many decades. It's incredible. So much wisdom here waiting to be, excavated. So I'm really excited. And you've been also researching a lot of research, especially citizen science, since 2010 on the microdosing, which is incredible also. And you have the most popular book, increasingly getting more and more popular, which is the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, Safe, Therapeutic, and Sacred Journeys. And recently your Symphony of Selves, and another book I heard of, which is exciting, Discover and Understand More of Who You Are, Who We Are, and then another one I heard, which was going to be about microdosing, which I'm really excited to hear more about the books that are upcoming. But for now, can we start with this? One of my online mentors, she said once that it really moved me. She said, what is happening right now globally, the level of shift, the level of seeking, the level of trying to, sense making is the aftermath of the kids from the 60s, the right. Counterculture and the psychedelic kids from the 60s. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in the 60s, we were so excited to find out that the world was much more harmonious and much wider and much more profound than we had been taught. And we thought with that kind of optimism, all we had to do was, in a sense, get together and improve the world. What we didn't know in the 60s is that the older generation felt very threatened by that, particularly when we said that their values were not valuable, were not helpful. So the 60s, in a sense, was unable to overcome the inertia and also to overcome the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. So now there's another cycle. And the one great difference is that your generation using psychedelics is not being opposed by the older generation, because the older generation is us who have been using psychedelics. So you get support from the onset. The value of psychedelics is becoming quite obvious. The fact that a lot of companies are trying to make money on it is evidence that they understand there's some benefit there, whether they do it correctly or not. So we're in a new wonderful period of people understanding that helping each other benefits everyone.
That's incredible. And earlier we were talking about microdosing being the new frontier in psychedelic use. I think that's also something to be talked about a lot more. And you have been the person behind this popularization of the microdosing, and you carry and you hold probably the most amount of citizens science data. What are you seeing happening here? Why do you think it's gone really, really out there, mainstream? And currently, right now, is almost every person I speak to, they heard of somehow microdosing. They had a friend microdose. It's become a conversation among everybody. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, psychedelics in general have suddenly gotten a huge amount of very good and very visible press. So all of a sudden, psychedelics are out of the closet. And the fact is, and I can just give you the United States, since psychedelics were illegal in the United States, about 35 million people took at least just LSD, let alone psilocybin and other things. And they were the better educated half of the population. And from what I know in the UK, it's not dissimilar. So when the news came out in the little research studies, there were millions of people who said, oh yeah, I know that, that's okay. I just wasn't willing to talk about it. So it's a little bit like when you are younger and you're just discovering sexuality, you're kind of hiding it. But then when you find out that everyone else is equally interested, you can talk about it and share it and learn and so forth. So there's a little of that. The other is that microdosing is safe. Psychedelics, high dose, are safe if you know what you're doing. But that's like saying driving is safe if you know what you're doing, but you don't say to someone who can't drive, well, here's keys and there's a car, I hope you work it out. Not safe. But microdoses, because they do so little that's disturbing, make it easy for people to find out for themselves if there's some benefit.
I feel like especially for the people in the West, and also the recreational use, the popularization of the recreational use and underground use. I think what I'm seeing in the UK is I meet also equally level of people that are kind of against it, or at least they just remember it from the recreational party scene type of thing. But now I feel like we're moving into more mental health, more well-being, especially with microdosing. I don't think you can recreationally microdose. I haven't seen anyone do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree that the microdosing doesn't disturb anyone's belief systems, which includes belief systems where I think they're totally wrong, but they can microdose and their health improves and their relationships improve, and they're less likely to be angry, they're less likely to hate. So it has a social benefit quite apart from its individual improvement.
Mm-hmm. What would you say the correct use of the microdosing? And for our listeners, if this is the first time they stumbled upon the concept of microdosing, how would you describe microdosing?
Sure. Microdosing is taking a very, very low dose of usually a classic psychedelic like LSD or magic mushrooms, but such a low dose that it has no classic psychedelic effects, no visual distortions or visual enhancements, no mystical breakthroughs, no overwhelming effects where you really can't function. Microdosing is more like putting the system in better order, restoring equilibrium. Where there's pain, there's less pain. Where there's fatigue, there's less fatigue. Where there's difficulty in focusing, people say they focus more easily. A lot of students have used it, and I get reports that they can pay attention better in class. One wonderful one said, even if it's a really bad teacher, I now can listen. So it's a way of in a sense, it does a little bit more than coffee does, because coffee is only a stimulant. Microdosing seems to affect all the physical systems more like a vitamin. So it again, it should be done carefully and correctly, and certainly measuring correctly. And if it's not working for someone, they stop without any problems. So it has a lot of in its kind of lack of excitement, it has a lot of advantages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And I also wanted to ask you about the is this a myth that a lot of people talk and say that you were the one to expose the guys in the Silicon Valley when they were just practicing microdosing LSD, so that we owe it to them, this advancement of the technology? Is that true?
Well, let me see. At least one thing I know is true. A very, very early story was in Wired. Wired is a very avant-garde, high-tech magazine. And he interviewed one person. And I know who the person was because I suggested it. And he was a recent graduate of one of the better schools in the Bay Area. He was an inventor, and he was a lovely person. And he basically said, this is helpful for me in my creative thinking. The article headline suggested that this was common in Silicon Valley. Now, he interviewed one person. That's even those of us without much science know that doesn't make a lot of sense. However, I called him a few weeks later and asked him about that. And he said, I don't write the headlines, but I will tell you, since I wrote the article, a number of my friends have called me and told me, yes, they are microdosing.
Wow.
So it was being used in Silicon Valley, and it was being used in very often by high-tech people around the world. Certainly in England, certainly in Paris, certainly in South America. So it's been out there a few hundred or thousands of years with indigenous people. So we were rediscovering, as we often do, that people who are closer to nature have experimented more and have learned more and are than we who are, quote, more advanced have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what are your thoughts on, the indigenous people would have it ritualistically, maybe for divination, or maybe just
well, that's the thing. If you read the anthropological literature, there's almost nothing there. There are lots of talk about higher doses of various substances, but microdosing was something practical, kind of the way you have something on the shelf like a spice and you're going out hunting. Well, if you take a little of this herb or this mushroom, you'll be a little sharper as a hunter. Your visual acuity will be slightly up, your reflexes will be a little faster, and you'll be a better hunter. So you take this and put it under your tongue and you're on your way. I mean, here's a version from our culture. This is in the 1940s, I think. This was a jazz musician, and jazz musicians would be playing one gig one night and another gig the next night, but the other night would be maybe 100 miles away. And they would be driving a lot. And what this guy said is, I would put part of a peyote button under my tongue and I could drive without being tired all day long.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So it is out there in ways that we certainly have no knowledge or kind of written reports of. Mm-hmm. So I found that that people liked it, basically. I won't say it was valuable at first. They simply liked it, and I asked people to try it. And from there, they told their friends, and then the newspapers started to report it, and more people tried it, and here we are.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I'm continually, hearing lots of stories about struggling moms with children having a better time, all kinds of things. And recently also diving deeper into the microdosing integration, because we have a growing group of people in UK, and we kind of heard a lot more deeper healing, such as mental health issues, cognitive decline, PTSD, all kinds of other symptoms, pathological symptoms, including chronic pain and inflammation. So this is almost hard to believe. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's hard to believe, particularly if you have a kind of pharmaceutical point of view, because pharmaceuticals like to be tightly focused. They like to do one thing well, but they don't usually, if they're successful, don't affect much else. The other things are, quote, called side effects, which you very often you don't want. But microdosing is more of a what we used to call a tonic, a general improver of your system. And depending on what your system's problems are, for instance, people who have migraines have told me that microdosing does not cure migraines. However, it lowers the amount of them by about 90%. So what I'm hearing is that the system is better able to handle whatever causes migraines. And this is what's common. So when people have serious conditions such as cognitive decline, what you know is there's a lot of brain left, no matter how much you lose. And so something that improves brain functioning should allow you to show some improvement in cognitive decline. And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. And would you say, I mean, I'm also hearing concepts like microdosing being a designer pill or a smart drug. I guess it just goes into the system and goes to the places where it needs repairing and balancing out. Those kind of activities are happening.
Well, the people who say it's a smart drug, they're comparing it with drugs that are predominantly cognitive, that are predominantly about intellect. But if you say to someone, well, someone in chronic pain, when microdosing, their pain is much less. And that isn't what smart pills do. So microdosing seems to, if you just imagine you put something under your tongue or you swallow it, eventually it goes to every cell of the body. There's all the research is kind of focused on the brain, and I think that's partly because we can measure brain waves. But if you look at, say, the neurons, which is what are supposed to be affected, there's a huge number of neurons in your gut and throughout your body. And so if it affects neurons in the brain, it affects neurons in the body. So we haven't begun to do that research because nobody quite knows how to measure that. And science self-limits by what it can measure. People don't have that limitation because they can report their own experience, whether it's measurable or not.
Mm-hmm. And what about this? I'm going to just quickly ask you about the placebo effect. I know you did say there was somebody that reported that saying they don't care if this was a placebo effect, they just had that relief and that was enough. I think it's also
well, the placebo effect, let's use the word carefully, because it's a word that has a kind of pejorative look, in science they hate it because it confuses their results. But in human beings, it's actually called the natural healing response. And you say, well, gee, that's a placebo. You didn't really, I didn't really give you an aspirin. I gave you a sugar pill and your headache went away. What happened? Well, your natural healing response felt in some way that you'd been helped by something put in your mouth, somebody who you trusted, and your system reacted to improve your health. And if you think about it, except for this little teeny bit of cortex, which has a lot of complicated thoughts, most of the body is insanely interested in being as healthy as possible. That's all it's interested in. And so something which gives it a little more capacity to do that, the body will use that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think this is what also we've seen in our groups as well, a lot more physical healing.
Yeah.
Rather than, because let's be honest, I mean, I read a lot of stuff online, and it seems like microdosing somehow trying to be stirred into, or stirred in a way that, oh, it's a biohack, and you could be so fully focused, and you could, it's almost like you can enter flow states and have energy and get tasks done. I think you have a immense experience in problem solving and other kind of research type of things. But when it comes to microdosing, what are your reflections on those people who just wants to come in as a biohack or a shortcut to something?
Well, shortcut is again, that's the negative term, but it's actually, a shortcut means you found a better, more efficient way of doing something. I think that sounds fine to me.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is that most of the research on psychedelics, high dose, is about mental conditions. And that's been transferred to most of the research about microdoses. What has not yet been really looked at, and your group may be the cutting edge here, is how many physical conditions have been helped by microdosing. That may be what's really important. Because it's true that, yes, you have better focus, but there are indeed biohacks which will give you better focus. But I don't know of any biohacks that will lower your symptoms if you have, say, Lyme disease or lupus. That's very different. And so we're just beginning to explore that. And because of the way the legal systems in most countries are, there's a confusion between physical and mental conditions. And there's very little in the health system to discover and discuss wellness. So if you're feeling good, there's no medication to help you feel better. But there is, of course, good food, good sleep, good relationships. And a lot of what we do in our lives is try and find things that make the good even better. Microdosing seems to be more in that category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great explanation, insight. So the way I understood microdosing is it kind of amplifies what we carry inside also, in terms of coming from a holistic therapy background. All of my experiences, my own growth and breakthroughs, and also the people that I worked with, I early on very much noticed that something very unique happens in a group process. So I also know lots of we call them the solo journeys, microdoses who just do this on their own.
Right.
But we thought, what if we bring people together? How would that turn out? Given the understanding of human beings, we're wired to be connected. And we decided to call it, let's create intentions to heal out loud. So we're going to heal out loud, meaning we're going to come into a super safe container with guidance, with sharing,
right.
All of these things. See how that can work out for the individual, rather than everybody does their own solo journeys.
Well, what's wonderful, Susan, is you are the explorers. You are the discoverers here. There are people in South America who are using some different substances, who are trying to integrate indigenous ritual into microdosing. But you're really doing it independently. And I'm really very excited by learning from you all this next level. Because if you think about it, we use substances a lot to make groups work better. If you think of one of the main uses of alcohol is to lower your inhibitions a little bit so that you're more able to be friendly without fear.
Yeah.
And we also know that if you take too much, it doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
Microdosing the same, which is microdosing lowers, it gives you, it is a slight stimulant. It is also a relaxant. It's also an antidepressive, so that when you're in a group, you are physiologically more open. And if the group is safe and secure, but then again, I'm starting to guess what is already happening in your groups, and I'm very, very interested in learning more.
Yeah, well, so much has happened since last year, over a year now, actually. And so from my background, like I said, the holistic therapy, we understand that the nervous system it carries these little neuroceptions that as soon as we feel safe, seen and held and accepted in an environment, suddenly the suppressed material starts to come to surface. And this is what we've seen. And we did have some breakdowns, meaning a lot of suppressed trauma surfacing. It was incredible to just watch and witness, because like you said, we're exploring this territory, and all I need to do is just really focus on the container to be super safe, non-judgmental,
right?
And people can really go through their processes. And yeah, we've seen some incredible results so far, and this is exciting, absolutely exciting.
Well, this is very exciting, because I do know from a number of therapists who have clients now who microdose. And what the therapists say is those clients move faster. It's easier for them to go through material. It's easier for them to deal with traumatic issues. They basically, they don't do better. That's a kind of, but they do it faster and easier. And so therapists more and more are supportive of their clients microdosing.
Yeah, I would.
You're taking it to the next level, which is group work. And of course, in a group, as the level of trust goes up, the willingness for disclosure goes up, and microdoses make the disclosure less threatening, because again, your physiology is better able to take it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we decided to call it trauma-informed microdosing. This is going to be the first, yes. So we do, also understand the importance of being trauma-informed, especially in my past years working with the macrodoses from, again, therapeutic use. I very much quickly understood they were very somatic, super somatic. And it's, I don't know how people, like you said earlier, you said, it's like driving. Would you just hand over the keys and then go and figure it out? I felt like the macrodoses were super somatic, and it actually made me nervous how people just go to those unknown places and explore macrodoses when they don't understand the nervous system and how suppressed trauma can, arise in those experiences. And if the facilitators are not professionals or educated in, especially with the Western people, I had a training with a shaman, indigenous women earlier on. And one of them, she said she struggled when she started working with people from Europe, because they had different issues. They had third world issues, and she wasn't used to how to hold space for them, because things that they were coming up with, she thought they were hilarious, according to her, because she's indigenous, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, as we know, cross-culturally, other people's problems often seem pointless and bizarre, but when you're in them, they're very serious. And when you get through your own problems, they often are exactly what the shaman says. They're pointless and bizarre.
Yeah.
How could I have spent, 18 years worrying about that evening when my father did such and such?
Yes.
Now that I understand, as I have, what was going on for my father, and I understand myself, I don't need to carry that anymore. So one of the things we know is that trauma doesn't grow in daylight.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful insights. And this was the concept that I thought, well, if we can bring the trauma-informed education into the macro and big experiences, people would come out so much better and with best results. And I thought, why don't we apply this to microdosing and see if we can do something around trauma and healing, and maybe go deeper in it, a group processes. And one time I heard from Rick Doblin, I think Rick Doblin was saying that finally they are ready for a psilocybin group processes. I was like, hooray, we're already doing this, great. So that kind of indicates like we're on the right direction with what we're doing. So that was quite exciting.
Yeah, there has been a little bit of work with high dose groups. But if you look at it closely, it's companies that say, gee, look how much more people you can treat in the same hour, and look at the more money you'll make. The group work you're doing is saying there is certain kinds of work for which a group is necessary. And part of that is building an atmosphere of safety and trust. Now, we try to do that in individual psychotherapy. We call trusting and caring and feeling our therapist cares for us. We either call that normal, sensible awareness, or we call it transference, and make somehow an illness out of trusting someone. But microdosing simply makes hard things easier.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly how we are also experiencing and feeling. From here, can we talk about what do you see is going to happen in the next few years? Where are we going with all this renaissance and the mainstream popularization? What do you see?
Well, someone asked me that a year or two ago, and about the companies and the commercialization and the monetization, and I said it'll be terrible, and they stopped. And I said, and out of the ashes of that first round, a lot of good things are going to come up. And so what I'm now seeing, if you actually look at the companies that are on stock markets, they've all done terribly, which is the fantasy that putting out some press releases and maybe even doing a little bit of research will be enormously profitable seems to be fading with the reality. And the reality is that the high dose world is a very difficult one to work in. Huge amount of government regulation, huge amount of money necessary to get anything done. Microdosing seems to be much more citizen science, and there are more and more ways that people can grow their own mushrooms, so that you're in total charge of your own body and your own substances. And since no one is being harmed, there isn't a lot of interest in regulation.
Yeah.
It's as if there are places, and I remember being in Sweden, and my wife needed the equivalent of a Tylenol or an aspirin. And they said, there's no charge, but you have to get a prescription and go to the pharmacy and stand online. And that was a shift of who's making the decisions for your body. And with microdosing, people seem to make, on the whole, extremely healthy decisions. And when microdosing doesn't feel right, people stop. They don't keep going. And it's a little bit, if you have a group and they're very excited and happy, and someone says, well, I took a microdose in your group and I had a bad experience. And you would say, well, maybe it's not for you. And it's a little bit like there's a restaurant and we all love it and we think you will love it too. And you go to the restaurant and you don't like the food. You don't keep coming back.
Yeah.
So there's a safety built in. If it isn't dangerous to start, and if it's uncomfortable, you stop. We're dealing with very safe substances. And Professor Nutt, N-U-T-T, in England, who was the drug czar until he told the truth about what are the most dangerous drugs in England, which of course were alcohol and tobacco, what he's pointed out is that psychedelics, and these are all high dose discussions, are among the safest drugs we've ever found. Microdosing is way safer than that. So we're dealing with something with what I call very little downside and a lot of upside. And that's a good ratio. So the risk to benefit ratio is very favorable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. And what really helps in the UK, or at least in Europe, because I find that we're still very much reserved when it comes to psychedelics. And, the attitude is kind of still very reserved. And what really works here, what we have created, is that it is not the center of what we do. It's the group process. It's the trauma-informed education. It's the coming together and connection. These are in the center of the structures that we are kind of following. And then we happen to have microdosing on top. It's not the center of what we do. That made the difference. Yeah.
That makes a huge difference. And of course, that's a little similar, and you mentioned it, to rituals in indigenous tribes, which is the important part is the ritual, and that you have a little addition to help the ritual along. Works for everyone.
Yeah, this is what's been the experience. And then also, of course, we have still a lot of people very much scared. They think that they will be tripping because they also associating it with the main the psychedelic stories and the myths. So what do you have to say to those people who they think they're going to trip on microdose?
Well, what we know is that if you take a small enough amount of almost anything, it has very little effect. You say, well, I can't drink because when I have 5 drinks, I'm a terrible drunk. You say, well, what if you had a quarter of an ounce? What if you had an ounce of beer? And they say, well, that's not a problem. And you say, well, that's what a microdose is.
Yeah.
And yes, you can trip on a microdose by taking too much. Surprise. You can get sick on cheesecake by eating too much. That doesn't mean cheesecake is a dangerous dessert. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, it's a common sense. They're saying, well, I'm afraid it's like a high dose. And the answer is, that's a very realistic concern, and it's not. And there are substances that are not psychedelic, which also can operate as microdoses.
Yeah. Also, what are your thoughts on the stacking? Paul Stamets come up with he really believes this could be the solution to overtaking or doing too much of the microdose, which again protects the person somehow.
Sure. Well, he has what's called stacking, and stacking is imagine a large capsule, and I have some psilocybin mushroom in the bottom, and then I have some lion's mane, which is also very good for cognitive help. And then at the top, I have a little bit of niacin. And when you take niacin, it opens the capillaries. It allows a fuller diffusion of whatever else is going on in the body. So much so that if you take a little too much niacin, you feel a flushing. Your face gets red, and your whole body actually can get red for a moment as blood courses more easily and quickly. Mm-hmm. So what Paul is saying is if you add niacin, people will be less likely to take a lot of it because that's very unpleasant. What we found is, and this is a study that a group called Microdose.me has been doing, and they have in their study 13,000 people, about half of them microdosing and taking a lot of tests and filling out psychological forms, and the other half just without microdosing, doing the same tests. So you have a very nice kind of science game of people with and without microdosing. And the microdosing people report all the normal improvements we expect, but they don't show, again, they don't get in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, like anything else, if you the phrase in the microdosing world, and it's out of other medical worlds, is start low, and stay slow, which is you start at the bottom of the range and you say, well, maybe I feel a little better, but I don't really feel much at all. And you say, well, maybe you can take a little bit more. And you say, now I see what you people are talking about. Yeah. And what people find is what they're calling their sweet spot, what's correct. So this isn't one size fits all. It isn't one dose fits all. And it isn't one stack fits all. There are other stacks out there. Paul's is probably the only one that's had some very good research. And it turns out that taking it with lion's mane and niacin seems to be better than just taking it on its own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds amazing. And also, as you said, there are so many adaptogens, nootropic substances that are not psychoactive, that can be mixed and stacked with the psilocybin or similar medicines. Yeah. And kind of amplify the benefits, I guess, amplify the results, the wellness.
We don't really know all the things that might benefit microdosing. What we do know is a mix of a few mushrooms, other mushrooms, seems to be beneficial, and people like it a lot. And that's all we can say at the moment.
Yeah.
There will be experiments of all sorts. There always are. And hopefully people will report in successful experiments and unsuccessful experiments.
Yeah. What would you like to say about the educational part? I think now, as it's getting so much popularity, the education part is not balanced out, and people have all kinds of misinformation, misconception around microdosing. How can we tackle this? I know I'm aware that we are now part of your International Microdosing Association, which is great. And I was so happy and privileged to be there last night. We had the first Zoom call. I think it was incredible to have so many professionals interested in microdosing coming together to find solutions. So this is a great initiation. So I love this idea. And yeah, what else can you say about the International Microdosing Association?
Well, the International Microdosing Association is really the own brainchild of the people in Holland who have been, remember, in Holland, psychedelic truffles, an undeveloped part of the mushroom, are legal. So they have had thousands of people microdosing various ways in various conditions over a few years. They now are working with a group out of South America, out of Peru, who are using one of the ayahuasca is made of two plants. One of them is called Banisteriopsis caapi. It's a vine. It's not the psychedelic plant, but people in South America have found that if you take just the Banisteriopsis caapi vine and use it, again, give it in microdoses, it has most of the same effects that we find in psychedelics. So they have developed a training guides and therapists to work with individuals, but, and you'll like this, they also work in groups.
Amazing.
And so they've developed a kind of community model where the people who are microdosing may have individual coaches, but they also have a group awareness. And they're finding that so beneficial that the people in Holland are taking the training from the people in Peru. And so we're all learning from each other. And when someone says, I think this is working a little better than what you're doing, again, this is the nice part about working in this psychedelic space, is people say, well, if your way is better than mine, I'll stop using mine. Rather than, I want to fight with you because I've got 2 years of experience using it my way, and I don't want to give up. I don't want to have to admit that there's a better way. Yeah. So we're dealing, it's a wonderful thing. You're actually dealing with adults.
That's amazing. So there is, of course, so many diverse medicines. I call them medicines, psychedelic medicines, just right. Because
I call them substances because a lot of people, because that's about as dull and blank a word as possible. And the word medicine implies healing. And when someone says, well, I'm fine, but I would like to I'd like to be friendlier with people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a psychodynamic issue. It's not about their childhood. They don't want a medicine, but they are happy to have something that helps.
Yeah. Yes.
Because,
Yeah.
for instance, most of us feel better if we eat ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a medicine.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. That's a great point. So there's so many substances to microdose. So I'll have to change, because I do use them as obviously, coming from my background, it's a healing.
No, it's fine to call them medicines. I'm telling you, my problem is not yours. No, also, if you know what you're talking about, it doesn't matter what you call it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as someone said, a rose by any other name,
yeah,
is still a rose. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we have so many. We have now ayahuasca wine and peyote. Everything can be microdosed.
Well, everything can be microdosed, and there's a lovely little world of people who are microdosing cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at that and I thought, what can that possibly be? And what they're basically saying is, if I have a full joint of cannabis, I'm a little stoned. You know, and there are things like I shouldn't drive and so forth. But if I have one puff and then I go about my business, it seems to make me a little happier. So people are experimenting with very small doses now of various things. So the list of substances keeps going.
Mm-hmm.
There are ibogaine substance from the iboga plant from Gabon is also now coming out as a microdose.
Yeah.
And then we find out that it was sold as a microdose, as a stimulant in France, I think in the 1930s. And it was considered useful for a range of conditions. And so here we are back again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rediscovering something that was literally sold in pharmacies in France, you know, a long time ago.
Yeah, that's great. And this is going to change our relationship and association with medicine, meaning how we medicate ourselves, how we, you know, utilize the taking medication. I guess this is going to give us a bit more freedom, like as earlier you said, taking care of your own body, taking care of how you take your medication.
Well, the problem with a lot of medications is that they don't cure, but they suppress symptoms so that you feel better. And if that's all you've got, that's fine. Yeah. But if you have something that improves your health, then the need for medication goes down. And modern medicine is moving in that direction. A lot of times you'll see, well, this substance will increase the effectiveness of your immune system. After all, that's what a vaccine does. A vaccine lets your body build antibodies in a safe way, so that when you have a virus, your system says, oh yeah, I know what that looks like, and I know how to take care of it. So in a sense, so a vaccine is not a medication, it's a way of getting your system to be more vigilant and to keep you in better health. And so that's a little bit more like what microdosing may be looking like.
Yeah, just building that capacity over time. Mm-hmm. Great. As we're coming to the end of our conversation, can we please talk about your book? Because I'm really interested, only because it kind of relates to the work I do in therapeutic way. And the book is the Symphony of Selves, because I know you talked about it a little bit, that we have all these different parts to ourselves. And
well, we have parts. We have actual selves which have integrity, because when you switch to a different self, you're still you. For instance, when you're working with a client, you're totally focused. You're in a non-judgmental, compassionate, hyper-aware act. And when you're not seeing patients, you're not quite that way. And for instance, you go and you're suddenly with very small children, And you may find that you're lying on the floor holding a little child over your head who's laughing and you're laughing. It's not the same activity, and it's not the same self. And then you may then get a call from your unfavorite relative, and you become a slightly different self. What I see, we have a whole wonderful world where particularly people in the knowledge industries are so focused on abstractions all day. Say they're making code, that when they come home and they're supposed to be fathers and parents and husbands or wives, they find it difficult. And very often what people do is they literally change clothes, which moves them, helps them move into a different space. And one of the problems we had during COVID is you couldn't get dressed and go to the office and be your office person, because it only took like 15 seconds to turn on your computer and bring it close so people wouldn't see that you were wearing pajamas. And so it was confusing of which self you were, because then in the middle of the sales conference of, are we going to open an office in Bogota? Your 2-year-old comes in, daddy, daddy, and has fallen down and hurt her knee. So we flip in and out of selves to the extent that we're healthy. And we also know this feeling of, I got out of bed on the wrong side, meaning I'm in the wrong self. Or there's a wonderful term called, I lost my temper, which actually means I found my temper. But later you say, how could I have done that? And you say that, and we have a wonderful phrase in English, I was beside myself. I love that. Because you're literally almost looking at you from another position. So what I've found with psychedelics and selves is, the more you understand that you have different selves, the more you forgive yourself and others, and begin to be compassionate in a whole different way. So, for instance, I have a little dog. I have a little 9-pound dog, a rescue. And now and then, when something triggers him, and he loves me more than practically anything, but some things will trigger him, and all of a sudden I'm looking at this frightening little monster, teeth bared, snarling. And I don't say, oh, you're really a nasty little dog and you fooled me all these years. Is no, I see something puts you in a different self. Mm-hmm. And then, a minute later, the same dog that was going to bite me says, if I could lick your nose, life would be ideal. And so we are like that. We have selves, and it turned out in psychology, until curiously, and it's complicated, used to be that was generally understood. And the only question was, do we have selves for pathology, or are selves normal? Those were the questions. And then all of a sudden things shifted, and we tend to have a cultural belief that there's only one self. And then you say, but how do we explain our own inconsistencies? Yeah. And the answer is, we can't. But if we have selves, you say, oh, I'm in the self that is unforgiving and unkind, and you got to stay out of my way. And the rest of me doesn't really like that self, but sometimes that's the best self possible for that situation.
Yeah, you are.
That's the basics. And what happens with the book is people read it, and their capacity to understand themselves shifts as they read. I mean, self-help books, and I've written at least one, at the end of it, you're supposed to do stuff. You're supposed to make affirmations. You're supposed to change your diet. You're supposed to do exercise. You're supposed to make apologies. You're supposed to do stuff. And they're like cookbooks. You can't eat food out of a cookbook, no matter how delicious the photograph is. But the Selves book, people read it and they say, I understand the world differently. I see it more the way it actually is. And that's a great moment for people. So that most of us have a relative who we've written off. we all used to love Uncle Albert, but then when he cheated my dad in a real estate transaction, and we haven't spoken to him in 18 years. You say, wait a moment. There's a part of him that was dishonest, but most of him is still the same person that you knew. He wasn't fooling you the other part of the time. He was just in a different self.
Yeah. What a simple but so profound insight and explanation. You are directly giving us the tools to have that radical acceptance. I love the term radical acceptance because because what happens in the self-improvement world is that people are continually desiring and chasing this idealized one self that acts and behaves the same every given moment, which is
wrong, which is a bad way to be. Machines do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, no matter what I do, I can't get my car to join me at dinner. It's just not designed to have that much flexibility, but I am.
Yeah.
And the other kind of obvious selves is, and it's a wonderful one, when you say to people, have you ever argued with yourself? And everybody goes, sure. And I say, well, who's the other person arguing?
Yeah.
And they say, oh. And there's that moment where you begin to recognize that you move in and out.
Yeah. One last thing. You talked about the AA, one of your interviews. I loved it. It changed and shifted. This is what I was feeling, because a lot of the people, now we're in this culture of like, eliminate and disregard everything that is negative. Let's chase positivity continually. Let's become this whole beings, all positive, love and light. But then you talked about the AA meeting where they start, you know how they start talking. I love that. Could you please say that again? That was such a great storytelling. And it changed my mind with AA as well. And I would like our listeners to hear about that as well.
No. Give me the back of that story.
You said like the AA meeting, you know how people start to talk. First, they have to say, hi, my name is this. And then they'll say, I'm an alcoholic, for example.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right. It's one of the beautiful things about AA, which is Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of the problems is if you look at what works for alcoholics, okay, psychotherapy is by far the worst. It has about a 2% improvement rate. And why? Well, because those of you in your audience who understand what being drunk is about will understand this. You behave very differently. And let's say you behave badly or stupidly or rudely. And then in the morning you wake up and you're really shamed by that. You're really dismayed. How could I have done that? How could I have hit my best friend in the mouth and laughed as I went out the door? Okay. And you say, well, that's crazy. I'm sick. In fact, I drink too much. So I'm going to go to therapy. And I go to a therapist and we talk about all that stuff. But the person that goes to therapy is the one that feels guilty or ashamed or has hangovers. The one who gets drunk doesn't go to therapy and nothing happens. It's a little bit, there's a joke in the Tibetan world where the Tibetan jokester, the Tibetan joker says to someone, oh, while you're up, could you go to the bathroom for me? Okay. And that's similar to the problem of the wrong person showing up in therapy.
Yeah. This is such a great insight.
And as a therapist, you've seen it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I love the way you say that, therapists always show up with this compassion, open-mindedness, non-judgmental selves into the therapy. Or of course, once the therapy session is over, they also struggle with their own other selves, other parts.
Yeah. There was a wonderful therapist I knew in Norway, and a lot of his clients were given to him by the court, meaning they didn't want therapy at all. And they had done something dangerous, criminal, whatever. And I said, how do you deal with that? He said, before I see a patient, I sit quietly in meditation until I feel that I can be at one with the patient. Wow. And then there's only one of us in the room. and I can be of help.
Wow, that's so beautiful. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, and for everything and all the work that you're doing around microdosing and psychedelic space. Before we leave you, what are your projects? What are you working on right now?
Well,
what would you like to say?
I'm working to help the state of Oregon in the United States come up with regulations of how to help people use, in this case, psilocybin safely and well. And they're wondering what to do with microdosing, and I'm wondering along with them. I am working on a book, a general book on microdosing, and I'm doing a certain amount of basically listening to stories and getting more information. So for instance, and this is a beautiful example of it, your work and your group are now of great interest to me. So one of the things I will do and we will do is I'll get more information out of you and group members, and that information I can use with other groups.
Amazing, beautiful. Yes, we'd love to support this project. Absolutely.
So while this started as an interview about my work, really the most exciting part of the interview so far to me has been your work.
Oh, thank you so much. This is such an honor. Thank you. Thank you for your support, and thank you for all of your guidance that we were able to use, because one of the things that we'd like to practice is your protocol, which we call it the Fadiman's protocol. Everyone knows you by that now. Everybody that came into the group processes who had no idea about microdosing, now they know you because that's the protocol that's been practiced.
Well, that's a very safe protocol. And there are other protocols. And people also need to find out what's best for them. And just a final note, what we found is people doing the Fadiman protocol for a month, which is what we asked for in our research. On the whole, they would take it less often afterwards because they were deciding what was right for them. Very, very, very few people took it more, but a great many people simply used it less often or even when necessary. You know, like someone said, I have a driving test. And so they microdosed that day. And what we know is, one is the placebo effect. They felt that they were doing something. But two, we know their reflexes were better, their vision was a little better, and their anxiety was less. So it was a good idea to use it for a stress situation.
I love that. And this is exactly what we've seen from the very early on group processes, because these are all different groups in different times. And the very early on groups who've gone through a couple of cycles at least, they did decide that they will have their own version of the protocol.
Yeah,
it could be less and make it your own. After a while, the intuition grows and the connection with the substance grows, and they become, they create their own protocols, which is great.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I've learned many years ago is when you offer people food, they decide how much to take off of the communal plate. We all are best at running our own body, our own lives as much as possible. And it's wonderful when people develop, well, you've developed this group work. There's nothing in my public writing about it. There will be. But that's how citizen science works, is citizens discover, share, and then other citizens find out. And eventually the science world will catch up. And they're starting to catch up now. But the citizens, the nice thing is when you have something safe and beneficial, it is citizens who will be doing the research. And you are among them, and I'm delighted to meet my new favorite researcher.
Oh my God, thank you so much. Such an honor. Thank you. I'm just so happy we connected, and we'll be in touch. Again, thank you so much. It's been an honor to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much, everybody. Hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments, and please do connect with Dr. James Fadiman, which we will add his links, and also check out his new projects and books that we've mentioned on the on the podcast. So we'll see you guys very soon. Maybe we'll have him again in the future. Who knows? Thank you so much. Yeah. Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Thank you so much for joining us. Psychedelic Conversations podcast is designed to educate, inform, and expand awareness. For more information, please head over to psychedelicconversations.com. You can also share with your friends or leave a review so that we can reach more people. You can also join us in our private Facebook group to keep the conversation going. This show is for information purposes only, and it is not intended to provide mental health or medical advice. Thanks for listening.